Hey everybody, this is Mr. View, and we effectively ended World War II the last time we talked, right? We found out that after Hitler had committed suicide and after Mussolini had been killed and dragged through the streets and hung up by a meat hook and Germany had surrendered, that we had to turn our attention to Japan. And there was a battle midway in 1942, but the main thing that ended after our island hopping campaign and we got close enough to Japan was when we dropped 2 atomic bombs, which was very controversial from our president, President Truman. Right? He dropped one bomb on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and then he dropped the second one on Nagasaki on August 9, 1945. About 110,000 people were killed instantly, and then many more died after the fact from the radiation. Right? This did effectively end the war. Japan, militarists, they still wanted to keep fighting, but the emperor stepped in and said, no, we're done. And so they gave up. And that ended World War II. That was very controversial, like I said, because those cities housed a lot of civilians, men, but also women, children, elderly, babies, you name it. They were all vaporized when that bomb hit in those two cities. So it was very controversial, and it's been debated ever since. But now World War II has ended, and we found out about the atrocities that had happened under the Nazi leadership and under their control throughout Europe, right? We often think of those concentration camps and things having belonged in Germany. That's not the case. They were spread throughout Europe, and they would ship those Jewish people or the communists or the POWs over there, and that's when they would be put to death. So let's learn a little bit about that. We know that the Nazis hated a lot of people, right? It wasn't just Jewish people that they had a problem with. They didn't like communists a lot. That's why they attacked the Soviet Union. They didn't like Christians. Some people don't know that. They obviously didn't like the Jewish people. They didn't like gypsies. They didn't like anybody of color. Any non-white, they didn't like. And they also didn't like anybody that was disabled, physically or mentally. Disabled, that basically meant you were going to a concentration camp and it wasn't going to end well for you. There were collaborators among the people in Europe, and these people, collaborators, were helpers to the Nazis, and they would turn in people who were Jewish or non-white or Christian or communist or anything. They would help out the Nazis. Some of these collaborators were Jewish themselves, and they would turn in other Jewish people because they thought it was going to get them better treatment. That wasn't the case. That ended up badly for those collaborators in those instances. The Nazis wanted to commit genocide. Genocide is the deliberate murder of an entire race of people. This isn't new for the Nazis, right? They wanted to get rid of all of the Jewish people. That's genocide. But that's happened throughout history, and it's still even happening today. They say it's happening in China as we speak right now, that they're trying to get rid of a big Muslim population over in China. And we try to keep our eye on it, and the world tries to keep our eye on it. But it's happened every so often throughout history. It's not uncommon that somebody is trying to get rid of an entire race of people, okay? In Germany, Jews had to register right away, right? They had to say, hey, I'm Jewish. And they thought, no big deal. I'm just telling everybody that I'm Jewish. They didn't think that they were going to actually get to that list, find them, and kill them, right? That's absurd. That's a crazy idea. If the United States of America said, hey, all Christians got to say they're Christian, a bunch of people would just say, yeah, I'm Christian, right? Not thinking that they were going to be eliminated later. They also had to wear that Star of David, that gold star, yellow star, right? And that had to be visible at all times. That just signified that they were Jewish, and the Nazis knew, who to control. Eventually, they had to move to the ghetto, which I've talked about. That's a walled-off part of the city. They had to live in that ghetto, and they could leave for work, and that was about it. From the ghetto, though, when they wanted to move the Jews to the concentration camps, they liquidated the ghettos. They cleared out those ghettos. They put people on trains and sent them over to these concentration camps. These trains were awful, right? They were awful places to be. You were often crammed into a rail car with a ton of other people, and you had to go you had to pee, you had to poop, you had to stand there in the sweltering heat. People would die in the freezing cold. People would die. They would often come in there and they'd say, hey, we need some more room in this train car. And they're like, it's full. But they'd point their gun and shoot. and everybody would back away, obviously, and then they cram more people into these train cars. So a lot of people died on these train cars, but once they got to the concentration camps, obviously it was horrible there, right? Immediately, your head was shaved, your valuables, if you had any, were taken, including your teeth. If you had gold teeth, they're ripping those things out, right? And you would be separated. Men and women were separated, but also old and young, and people who could work and not work. If you were unable to work, you were sent to the gas chambers, right? So you go to these gas chambers. They might give you a bar of soap. Say you're going to take a shower, and then they gas you as you went in there. Um, this included all the elderly people, any disabled people. Think about babies and things like that. They were obviously unable to work. They were immediately eliminated. So the people who could work were sent one way. People who couldn't were sent another way. The video that I assigned you for the next couple of days talks about a lady having a bundle, and she had to decide: do I give my bundle, my baby, to an older person who's going to be gassed, or do I go to be gassed with my baby? And she gave up the bundle. She gave up the baby because she knew she was going to die if she didn't. So very difficult circumstances and terrible, terrible situation. Okay, so these were death camps. As I said, these camps themselves, if you rebelled in these camps, if you tried to fight back, obviously you were put to death. But it wasn't just Jewish people in these camps. When you watch this video, it'll talk about American POWs will be talking about their experiences, how a man was there and he was an American soldier who had been captured. And he says that he heard, he saw people being staked out, staked to the ground and left to die. And so there's terrible things that happen, not just to the Jewish people, these concentration camps, but to other people also. Right? 6 million Jews died during the Holocaust at these concentration camps. Another 5 million people died at these concentration camps too, and their stories are important. The guards would take target practice on people too. They didn't like the Jews, obviously, or these people who were prisoners there. So they might try to pick off an ear or an arm or a finger or something like that, just for sport. Women were abused physically and sexually. Some, not all, obviously. If you got sick and you could not work, you were gassed. We know that they weren't fed well, right? But if you got the flu and you couldn't get out of bed that day, you were put to death, right? You always had to show up for work. And once your health would fail because of lack of food or whatever, hygiene, anything, infections, they weren't gonna take the time to get you better. You were just gonna be killed, and somebody else would take your place. Their bodies were burned in these incinerators, right? They take the bodies. That's not how they died initially. Right? They were generally gassed first or shot or whatever, and then they were put in these big fireplaces, these incinerators, and they burned the bodies. They burned the evidence. Right? They also did some crazy experiments on these people who were at these camps. One guy was Joseph Mengele, Dr. Mengele, and he was a crazy doctor. He would inject people with motor oil or just crazy things and then try to cure them or see how long they would live. He had a fascination with twins, and I read a story about him actually taking the skin off twins and trying to join them, which they only lived like a day or so after that. But he was a terrible person. He eventually escaped before he was captured. He went down into South America and lived there. He ended up dying in the ocean, if I remember right. So a lot of crazy things happened. If you see a documentary about this guy and you're interested in the Holocaust and things, he was a terrible person, and it's pretty fascinating what he did and how crazy he actually was. They had death marches. As the Allies moved in and approached these concentration camps, the Nazis didn't want to be caught. They didn't want to be found out that they were killing all these people, getting rid of an entire race of people. So they would hold these death marches. They marched from one camp to another camp to avoid being caught. And these marches were death marches. As they marched, they were obviously not fed or allowed to slow down. If they fell behind, they were killed. So they had to keep marching, day after day to get to these camps. So those marches are unbelievable and fascinating as well. Horrific events, I guess. So, anyways, after World War II, we have the final effects. We have 75 million people dead. That is way more than World War I, right? Where about 17 million, 8.5 million died. 17 million were wounded. World War II, 75 million dead. We also had the Holocaust that we just talked about. There were war crimes committed throughout, and they had war trials as a result. Guess what? Even last week, the United States was shipping a guy back to Germany who was a prison guard. And he's going to stay on trial, even though he's like 90. He's going to stay on trial for what he did during World War II. The United Nations was formed. It's like the League of Nations, but it's survived since then, and the United States joined it. The Cold War happened as a result or an effect of World War II. Cold War between Russia and the United States. We know a little bit about that already. We'll learn more later. And then an arms race happened between a lot of different countries, but especially between the Soviet Union and the United States. So there's a lot of different effects from World War II. I know I rambled on a little bit, but that's all right. Answer your questions, and then there's a follow-up video about Holocaust survivors, and that's going to take you right through spring break. So I'll talk to you later. Have a great day.